Okay, so now that we started talking about the upcoming costume project, there are a few things I wanted to touch base with on everybody because next Monday will be our practice. You don't have to come in costume, but essentially we're going to just figure out who's going to come from what side and pacing, just to get an idea of how long it will legitimately take, half the class to move through the space. So one of the things to do that is to understand a little bit more about your specific costume and any special effects or performative aspects that it will require. I know I've talked to many of you who you have like a specific thing that is going to happen on those larger, circular points that may cause a few extra seconds or some time. Um, and so after our call today, I'm going to on e-learning, I'm gonna put a Google sheet um, that you can fill out and just write, maybe your concept and um, I know some of you don't want to give away your costume to each other, but if you don't mind, at least just putting some kind of description about what it's going to be doing, or what like you are going to have to be doing in that spot. Then I would be able to maybe gauge, who gets timed where and from what direction, because at one point you'll also be walking past each other. So if, like, for instance, two people have really large costumes, I probably would want them, as they're walking past maybe somebody else that has a smaller costume, so they don't distract from each other or hit each other to some extent. Um, but also, I know some of you you're thinking of a partner narrative. So it does require you to be in near proximity to each other. So I'll put in some column criteria on that Google Sheet and you can fill it out the best that you can for Wednesday. So when we meet Wednesday, we can talk about it and make sure that all of these kind of preemptive plans are in place. Um, I also do want to, I don't think what I'm going to present today will take the entire time. So it will give us some time to connect and maybe talk one-on-one or answer questions as you're probably making substantial progress on that project now that we're about a week out. Um, so think about those. Think about any questions you may have. You can put them in the chat or you can wait till after we go over today's lecture to get into it. And let me pull up today's lecture. So the content we're going over today has been on e-learning for a little bit. There's a PDF there. And let me share my screen here. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, um, today we're going to be returning to the topic of the Bauhaus. We talked about it briefly a few weeks ago. We watched a small little documentary. I think it was a BBC special that had active design students reenact what it would be like in the Bauhaus. And they put on some costumes and I think they made paper. Students in the Bauhaus would often make their own media and medium to then be able to do their work. So I'm actually going to transition into the Bauhaus by first talking about um, what it would be like to be a design student in ancient Egypt. And I think in this conversation will be even richer after all of the presentations on the ancient design in a contemporary world, because many of you had uh, design objects or movements or ideas that were rooted in kind of ancient Egyptian culture, such as hieroglyphics. So, for those of you that have taken the Caves to Cathedrals class, um, does anybody know what the symbol on the left side of the screen is? Just shout it out if you know it. Annie,
I think it's
I saw
for I think it's for life and like the circle of life, I'm pretty sure.
sort of, yeah. Does anybody else have an idea on that one? Okay. Well, you are not wrong in that, and we're going to go over it in more detail. But it is essentially when we see this symbol, it has now become our, mainstream understanding or a symbol of ancient Egypt. We see this and we think of ancient Egyptian culture because it's so prominent. On the right side of the screen, we have the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic is essentially the government that was in rule at the time of the Bauhaus. And just, throughout history, every government and authoritative body had some kind of logo or symbol that represented their culture and their power. And I do realize the sun is beaming in through my camera, so I'm sorry if I'm the sun is there. So hopefully you're looking more at the screen. But um, this eagle was their symbol for a few different reasons. But I think just when we look at these two things next to each other, we can kind of see some kind of iconic correlation. And that's not by mistake. So let's get into it a little bit more. Um, So the school in ancient Egypt was the Per Ankh, which translates to the house of life. Um, and it was the entire, not just a singular school, but it was the design education system in ancient Egypt. And so as we talk about this, it'll be important to know that um, design curriculum and design education for many different cultures across the globe, across time, those look different. So when we think of what we study in terms of design today, it will be different than what I talk about for ancient Egypt. So this was a multifunctional institution that was closely associated with temples and the priesthood in ancient Egypt. Usually today, we think of priesthood and religion or theology as kind of a separate discipline or a separate school. You wouldn't necessarily combine the two, but um, architecture is deeply rooted in philosophy. And so when we think of early designers, this is before there were any names for the designers, by the way. So when we think of early designers, um, it's actually a philosophical practice. So this school served as the educational center for a wide range of disciplines, including architecture and design. I'm using those terms because there are contemporary terms for the understanding of those disciplines, but of course, those are contemporary terms. So the Per Ankh actually translates directly to House of Life, and it symbolized the preservation of knowledge, culture, and the perpetuation of Egyptian civilization. Um, and so students in the House of Life believed in the school's dominant value, which was the preservation and perpetuation of Egyptian culture. It was a requirement in Egyptian culture that everything you did had to support the greater religious beliefs and the perpetuation of civilization. And so essentially it's saying like everything you do needs to leave your mark. It needs to tell the story. Um, and it's one of the reasons why when we often think of ancient Egypt, we think of tombs with hieroglyphics or paintings. It's because anything that was built then would have writing um, on it. And that was a general requirement because if there were to be ruins, they should also function to tell a greater story. Um, and we know today the reason we're even talking about ancient Egypt, and you've probably seen more movies and media coverage and in academic lectures about ancient Egypt more than any other civilization. It's because we have the most amount of documented information of this particular culture. And naturally, as humans, when we have that, it lays the foundation for our understanding of the ancient world. Um, that being said, we do still have a lot of documentation of other cultures, but this one by far stands out. And many believe it is because so much emphasis in their education and the practice in their life was on the perpetuation of the civilization. So the values and the beliefs would always be told. That was a religious practice and a disciplinary practice. So if you were going to school to learn how to, design XYZ, it would be for the purpose that XYZ is perpetuating the civilization and the culture. Um, so when we think of innovation, to bring this back to Riddy, um, what does that mean for Egyptian culture and civilization in terms of innovation? The ancient Egypt, thousands and thousands of years. Um, and it's hard for us to fathom that, but that's a very long time that culture and civilization was sustained. So when we think back about it, do we think about the evolution of anything specific or the innovation of anything? Do we see anything that had an origin in ancient Egypt and documentation that evolved from new knowledge or new methods of construction, new materials? Um, it is interesting that the attention that we pay to those ideas, I mean, the whole point of the ancient Egypt in a contemporary world was, or not ancient Egypt, ancient design in a contemporary world was to identify some early design ideas or objects or methods and trace them across time to better understand how they're expressed today. Um, and often, for those of you that had something that was rooted in Egyptian culture, when you traced it through time, was there a huge difference in what it was maybe originally and how it is expressed today? And is that innovation by your own definition? I'm curious. Or anybody that, watched the presentations or has thoughts on this, please share. Probably good to start with what does innovation mean to you? Not necessarily the academic definition of innovation or what you're told innovation means, but what does it actually mean to you? I will try to look into sorry if my screen keeps going dark. I don't know what's happening. I think my computer's adjusting to the light. I don't know if you see that on your end too. And then another question I have, innovation's in the name of RITI, and you chose to come to RITI. So did you intentionally pursue school because of your ideas related to innovation? Or did that have an influence in why you came to design school, but specifically to RITI since it has innovation in the title? You can put your answers in the chat too. I will check the chat. I don't see all of the class on my little thumbnail on Zoom, but I do see some people and it changes. So I could just kind of find a name in my view and popcorn our way. Um, so, oh, Charlotte did you all a solid. Um, I feel like innovation means trial and error, trying to put your values into work. I think every major needs has innovation in it. We are all working towards new ideas. Okay. So it's a good segue now when we return back to ancient Egypt. Um, what if there's not new ideas? What if it's the same ideas and you want to make sure that everybody knows it for all of time? Why is it important to work towards new ideas? There's not a right or wrong answer to any of this. It's just um, to provide some context into your role or your position in design school, um, because you're a part of something much bigger than yourself in terms of the lineage of design school. But you're also growing your own design agency and belief systems. So understanding, where you fall and what you believe helps your own practice as well. Innovation is involvement of a skill to keep making it better. Okay. Okay. So kind of like honing a skill. So I guess the practice of it. Would that then mean that school itself, by definition, where you're learning something and you're practicing it to become an expert, is that a form of innovation?
I think it's similar to like especially in our studio class, how we do the same things over and over again, but each time we keep doing them better,
Okay.
like design process wise.
So when you say better, do you mean like your clearer communication or
Yeah.
you've learned something so you can like now put some new information into it?
Yeah, I think like each time like we learn something new about it and then we like it just keeps like growing like better. I don't know how to still word that.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Um, it's important to work towards new ideas, even if they might not necessarily be new, because it helps with your own creativity, but also others. Okay. Interesting. Um, so we'll just kind of come back and forth to the chat. Um, there's in the House of Life, there's a range of disciplines. So what does that have to do with priesthood? Like, why would priesthood be, I guess, the core of a school? Or why would, like, what if instead of innovation, the I in RITI, it was like priesthood? Um, Design innovation and maybe priesthood isn't the right word, but um, lifeblood or religion, it's by priesthood, they mean somebody that is studying theology or is pursuing some kind of religious, using religion as a way to align values and goals. Okay. Yes. That's a really good insight. And that is when you think about a religion, oftentimes people will say like, well, how do you practice your religion? What are the practices? If you're learning about a new religion, you might just kind of want to know like what are those daily things in your life that you do that makes it maybe different than something else. And we do call those practices because it is something that you do every day and routinely. And so there is this commonality of this idea of practice and value. Oh yeah, so the the House of Life, there was only really one big institution. It did have a headquarters, but it also had satellite branches throughout the community. All right, so preservation and practice. The mission of this school was to ensure eternal survival of the sacred words, the essence of Egyptian culture. And these sacred words um, are rooted in the religious beliefs. Usually, religions have some kind of sacred text. The words themselves aren't the sacred, but it's what they mean, it's what they represent. And so it is true. It was the central thing is that everybody who studied here came here and used their disciplines to ensure the survival of the sacred words. In doing so, the disciplines then became more homogenous. So they weren't as separated as we know disciplines today. So, for instance, right now we have product design, but we have interior architecture. Those are very separate and they operate very separately in the contemporary world. But in ancient Egypt, those were the same things, and right along with architecture. And artists, when we think of fine artists or visual artists, they were right there too. And also people that write, scribes. All of these things became things that you would have to learn going into design school because you couldn't not be an architect without then understanding the scripture and the best way to communicate and the artistry of that. And so the whole point of this school was to preserve wisdom um, for eternity. And that's why it's the house of life, is because it has this cyclical nature to it. Um, there's many different interpretations of their symbol, and there's many different evidences. So you can see three different deviations of this icon. Um, there are legitimate different representations of it throughout history, um, but it really depends on what was being meant by it. The school had a temple, a library, a university, a publishing center, and a healing center. So when we think of RITI or a design school and we were to list, all of the things, like it has a dream lab and a material library and a computer lab, all of those things, this is their version of it. And you can see that it was built. These are artistic representations, but not all of them. Some of them are photos from like the 90s of tourists before there were laws against um, actually walking on ruins. You can see how this main headquartered school was built into the rock. That is another method of preservation thinking. Um, it was a private, it was seen, we would consider this a private religious school, and it was governed by the church. And then all studies were considered acts and devotions to gods. So those iterations would be a religious practice. You would maybe feel fulfillment in the fact that you were seeking perfection, for a higher purpose, not necessarily for like another person. You know, when we think of designing for someone else or designing for a brand or a market, it would really be for religious beliefs. So, a day in the life. You're there, you're ready. Your day starts at dawn. So, by the way, this is a sleepaway school. A lot of people would live there, like a campus. Not everybody. Some people lived close enough where they could commute, and others went to, the satellite schools. But primarily, you would live there. So at dawn, you wake up and you do a group cleansing and preparation ceremony, and it happens in the temple cisterns and courtyard. And so this is an AI representation of those areas. So deep in the school, it was open air. Um, you would have this group cold bath, and it would symbolize the cleansing mind and new knowledge. And so you would often see large basins of water nearby. Um, you would also then have group hymns recited in the courtyard while wearing white linen, um, because white was the symbol of, or a color of purity. And so you would have new white linens every day to start a new day. You would have guided meditation to bring harmony between your body, the place, like your physical, the building, and the cosmos. Those three things in Egyptian culture always had to be in harmony. And if they weren't, um, then it was seen as chaotic. So your body, the physical environment, and the cosmos had to be in alignment. And then these types of rituals mirror temple priest practices, and the students rely on the priests to deliver daily guiding principles. And so this over here in the painting is an image of some of these white linens and some of these rituals. It is interesting though, because I'm sure some of you wake up and take a cold water plunge or something like that and then do yoga. So it's we'll talk about soon we'll talk about these churches still exist. The House of Life still exists today. Um, And so we'll talk about some of those practices. Then after that, you would have your morning focus, and your class would be called Measurement, Form, and Word. So instead of form and space or form and surface, it would be measurement, form, and word. It happened in an open air colonnade and a shaded scriptorium. So somewhat like Riddy, outside of the that glass classroom where there's those, it's a colonnade, and then there's those outdoor tables. That's very similar to these types of environments. And oftentimes they were used because you would actually scribe on the surfaces because you're practicing, right? So you're doing the real thing, you're learning. But then it would be cleaned or resurfaced. So instead of paper, that you would just paint over it, essentially. Um, so your studio would be called Plans of Eternity. Um, and I'm making a correlation here, so it's you can kind of put yourself in there the position, but it would be a design drawing class for architectural scrolls. So floor plans, columns, and enclosures. And then you would have a seminar and you would study sacred geometry. So ergonomics class that studies geometry, often based on the golden ratio. And so we'll talk about where the idea of ergonomics and its parent anthropometrics actually has evidence of coming from ancient Egyptian culture. because of this alignment with the body, the place, and the cosmos. Um, and then you'd have a seminar class, you'd have a design communication class of hieroglyphics, so inscriptions that accompany every aspect of design. And so everybody studying design would go to this. And you can imagine if the entire belief system of ancient Egyptian is rooted in the body, the place, and the cosmos. If you're particularly becoming a practitioner or expert in like one or two of those things, it's going to be really important. You have a really big role in the preservation of culture. Um, so some other curriculum that you would have is mathematics and geometry. Um, you would learn essential architectural planning and design. So some of these things, and I like this book, it's called The Temple and Man, Sacred Architecture of the Perfect Man. And by man, I do mean person or human. Um, there is a lot of research done into understanding the proportions of Egyptian ruins and architecture and tombs. And you can see that if we look at floor plans, and these are common floor plans, so a lot of the plans where reinforced. There would always be this entrance, courtyard, colonnade, basin, and then interior spaces. There was always this kind of like transect because the transect itself was a spiritual journey. And you would pass through specific architectural features. Here are some Egyptian architecture, like imagery. And it's supposed to tell you a story as you go through it. So it is sort of like an affirmation, like a daily affirmation is just from like walking one place to the other. But in looking at a lot of these plans compared to one another and laying them over some of the imagery of the body, we can see that there is a correlation. And in fact, even in the seated body, um, tombs were designed at angles that represented the same slope as a seated body. Um, and we can see this at many different scales. This is just a representational sketch of that concept. But everything that gets tested, like, oh, let's see if we take some of the imagery from ancient Egypt based on, the human form and compare it to the built form, whether a plan or a column or a pyramid or pieces of furniture. It could like so many things. There's always a true correlation between the two. And so this is the Egyptian understanding of anthropometrics is that everything is designed based on the body because the body is highly spiritual. And the body is in it of itself seen as a divine creation. And so we think of ergonomics and anthropometrics as, design that accommodates the body and is functional and is easy to use. Um, Very different. I mean, a similar kind of thing where we're understanding the body in proportions, but very, very different. And you can see it's because the purpose was to perpetuate the body, space, and cosmos. And so they weren't really caring if these, artifacts, which there was an understanding that the House of Life is continuous, that these weren't necessarily meant to be comfortable. Um, you would also study astronomy, of course, like understanding the cosmos. Knowledge of astronomy was important for architects, and I use that term to mean all designers, to gain or to align structures with celestial events and religious symbolism. So there was not just studying the existence of these things, but then drawing meaning from them. So bringing it back to a ritual that's done on Earth, a religious celebration, and marking it with some kind of celestial event. And we often see in the upper right-hand corner um, specific areas within the school and other parts of ancient Egypt that are just meant to study astronomy. You would also study theology and symbolism. So, understanding the religious and cultural aspects of design was crucial. Um, Architecture in ancient Egypt was deeply intertwined with spirituality. So, for instance, this chair is not just a chair, it is tricked out with so many things. So, yes, it has we might see it as adornments, but it does tell a story. The feet are symbolic. The animal heads are symbolic. The colors are symbolic. The proportions are symbolic. Not one design intervention of this chair or any other items were without a direct correlation to a religious belief. And then, of course, communicating that on top of it. So, very similar to when we have a design and then we have process work or diagrams that help communicate why the design is the way it is, they would just put that right on top of the design and it would become a part of it. So, your midday focus, you would have lunch and field experience. This happened in a number of temple workshops and building sites. Your lunch would be bread, figs, and beer. Maybe that's not too different than what you actually have for lunch on a daily basis. Um, and the experience focus would be on material craft. So you would learn how to mix lime for plaster, how to carve limestone, how to measure and align using plumb lines and sighting tools. You would chart sun's shadow for orientation. Your instruction was hands-on and observational. Observations had an emphasis of natural rhythms as a generator of form. So I know last week we had a great presentation on a sundial. Um, so you would probably learn how to make something similar and then be tasked to watch it and observe it and derive a higher purpose and a higher meaning from it and learn that that's actually symbolic of a house of life. And what does that mean if there is a natural rhythm to how sun is moving or shadows, what does that mean on a spiritual level? And then how is that reinforced through a religious practice? Um, so there would be a variety of things that you would do. Some of the practical training that you would do during this time would be hands-on experience. You would work on real construction projects under the guidance of experienced architects. So you would do your apprenticeship, you'd get put to work. And then you would this is a this is meant for comedy purposes, this image in the top. Um, You would learn the use of tools, materials, and construction techniques. And so sometimes there was innovation by being able to do the same thing better, which I think, Nora, you were like really getting at. But it might be learning how to lift or carry heavy weights better, so you could build things faster. It would be maybe creating new tools to do very similar things. And so some of that was learning what the tools are trying to do and then trying to do something or learn something better to enhance that. And so this image, there's debate on this image in the top, this black and white image, because it is based on an actual like carving. But some speculate that it um put in like jackhammers in there intentionally with, well, like an ancient Egyptian version of a jackhammer, because it looks like there's two people kind of like using large power tools. Other people speculate that these are symbolic for other things. We just see them as power tools because perhaps over time, shape and form has maintained similar, even though our evolution of capabilities and how we do something is different. Because there was a lot of imagery similar to these shapes and um, snakes as well. You even see a snake right here. So there's speculations. Okay, I just got a thing that says I'm looking at the slideshow on e-learning, but are you supposed to be sharing it on the screen? Am I not sharing my screen right now? I am supposed to be sharing my screen. Do you not see? I can see your screen. You are. I can see it. Okay, good. Thank you. I can see it. Okay, good. So you can see my Adobe PDF. Okay, good. All right, thank you. I'm on a different computer today, so really took me through a spin there. Um, Designers held a valuable place in ancient Egyptian society due to the monumental structures and artwork that they created, not unlike today. They were responsible for designing and constructing temples, tombs, palaces, and other significant architectural works that served both practical and religious purposes. And so the reason, I mean, there's a lot of um, artifacts from ancient Egypt, from metals and jewelry to furniture to art. Um, but that was less important in terms of preserving society than the actual structures that housed it. In fact, those may be available today when other cultures don't necessarily have that much that we've discovered or found or documented. Um, because of the importance of the architectural, very unique architectural designs for preserving these objects. And so it is sort of interesting to think about. In the afternoon, you would take to the courtyard and you would study body and space. So you'd actually study medical scrolls. And this would inform on human comfort and design. So you could think of airflow, light, and proportion. Why are those things important? Right here. So when you were inside the pyramids, you wouldn't die. There was actual airflow to the surface. Not a lot, but enough. You would actually be able to receive oxygen. Um, so there's a functional and logical purpose, but the spiritual purpose is that it allowed the souls and spirits to um, come in and go out and move. Um, you would have a collaborative workshop called Egyptian Holism. So multiple disciplines joined for dialogue and reflection, which I think could be kind of fun if we had a symposium where just like a bunch of different majors came together to just reflect on their day and talk about what they learned from different perspectives. You would focus on design, medicine, astronomy, and theology are one. Um, and you would discuss how that you can together serve the gods and each other. And there would be live music. In the evening, you'd have words to sustain life in the library. It was a studio. It was technical and spiritual practices. And so you recorded your day on pottery shards and school walls, acting as a living archive and the preservation of lessons. Um, Students chose their scrolls. They made oil lamps to continue into the night, and they would recite words to sustain life. And I have a translation here. It says, "May you live, be whole, and be healthy, given life, strength, and stability for eternity." And then these are three symbols that you often see, and this, the per ankh symbol, it means life. Then we have prosperity, which looks like maybe a candle flame, and then health. I don't know what the health one looks like or how to correlate that. If you do, if you have an idea of what emoji that could be, I don't know, let me know so I can describe it. And so hieroglyphics, as we've learned, actually, I think three different people had different styles and cultures of scripts over time. And so hieroglyphic writing and documentation were very important. Um, it was scribed directly on to the structures. So you would have to essentially scribe written text directly to your work, um, which means there's an artistry to it. And then it was seen as a crucial for the historical and religious purposes. So that is why you see everything adorned. This wasn't decorative. This was literally adorning the beliefs to every and everything possible. So these images represent um, writing on scrolls or tablets or pieces of, clay shards. Everything was used and reused again. And then you would go into your night. Um, you would have manifesting dreams. Um, So there was a house of rest. That is where everybody slept. And there were small cells near a sanctuary, or others would go home. You would have an independent study here. So you would have incubation rituals for divine messages. At nighttime, you would only be so lucky if your body became an incubator for divine message. And so students tried to invite these. So, I mean, very similar to when people say they try to have like lucid dreams or try to control their dreams, very similar. So, students would do things to try to inspire more messages to come into their dreams. Um, they would sketch or write and hope that those sketches and scriptures act as seeds. Their belief was that designer listens, not invents. And so any ideas then that one might have for, say, innovation, would be understood through listening, not inventing. And so these are some images of sleeping. Um, there is a god that is known to come into your dreams and deliver messages. And so when you see sleeping, or these types of symbolisms, you often see a mixture of kind of like a bird or maybe a dog. These they had different types of messages that they would deliver. Um, and this still exists today. That's why I put this up here on the right-hand side. If anybody plays video games or reads, more like different styles of comics or texts. Um, but there was, let's see, I think this is from a card game. I don't know if you know this game, let me know. I don't. but it is the god of the dead. Um, this is the one you don't necessarily want coming, because that's the a dog-headed deity means death. And so you often see this eagle, an eagle figure, which carries life and meaning and preservation of society and beliefs. Um, and we do see some of those imagery today. So we can go back to the idea. These are over time. We see the Weimar Republic eagle. Um, we see adoptions of the original kind of per Ankh cross. We see it with like an eye or with wings. Sometimes we there's like Mason associations that adopt it into symbols. Um, I don't think everybody is always aware that this is kind of where it comes from, or the root of these. But it is something to keep in mind because it is created for the perpetuation of a belief. And I know I mentioned last week that this applies to RITI as well. And it applies to design school. And when we talk more about the Bauhaus, and other design schools, their design school has a problem with becoming overly bearing on students' practices and beliefs. And it is something to always be on the watch for. And this happens in life too, but um, I have noticed over the past month, things are starting to change a little bit that haven't ever been before. And so there was a covenant created, the Riddy Covenant, the commitment to civility. Um, there's a statement that says our community thrives when all members uphold values. Um, and I want you to be aware of when you see these things in life, that they do pull from the historic icon of perpetuating a belief system, and they're used strategically. So even though what some say is a plus sign, but when it's isolated without plussing something and it's put into a circle, and in fact, sometimes the proportions of the plus sign are changing, then you start to become a little sensitive to things that happen slowly without you noticing. Um, Let me go to the next slide here. Not that I'm saying it's bad. I'm not going to say anything like that, but I want you to be aware because I certainly am. Let's bring it back to the Bauhaus. Everybody hears this word Bauhaus all the time. It's glorified. It's seen as like the foundation of design. It's just a movement. It's a group of designers studying design at a certain time in life. But there's groups of designers that study design throughout all of time and all of places. The reason why I'm going to kind of focus on the Bauhaus is because it does have a direct correlation to the Upper Midwest, and that's pretty unique to us. And so the Bauhaus was founded in 1919 in Weimar, which is a city in Germany, but also was the headquarters of the Weimar Republic, by an architect named Walter Gropius. Its core objective was to reimagine the material world and reflect the unity in all the arts. And so at the time, and so on the left-hand side, that is Walter Gropius, and this is his publication. So media by the 1900s. We no longer have or are using clay tablets. We have mail. We have methods of distribution of ideas. We have type. Um, And so it is very possible for people to create marketing materials and write manifestos and publish those and continue perpetuation of ideas and values through this method. Um, and so Walter Gropius was seen as very liberal at the time because before the Weimar Republic was the imperial period. And so the imperial period, what we might think of as like Victorian era here. So, stodgy, conservative, maybe like traditional. I know Victorian, I know that's a lot to put there because it's the truth of Victorian is that it's anything but um it was rooted in tradition and there were a lot of old people that didn't want to change. And to them, art and design meant like classical, like Monet, when we think of like high, quote unquote, high art. And that's not really what Walter Gropius felt. He actually felt like all people should have the opportunity to pursue art and design, which socially was very liberal of him because at the time, women and um, people of color, people from other countries that wasn't, Germany or like right in that Western area, and Jewish people were not necessarily allowed or encouraged to study in the art school during the imperial period. But Walter took it over and he opened it up. It caused a lot of controversy in the city. There was a lot of political upheaval where people thought the world was going to hell. Like women in the Bauhaus were cutting their hair short. There was a lot of partying, and by partying, there was a piano in their courtyard that they would play. Um, and it was seen as like a new way of thinking. And so very different from the Egyptian, ancient Egypt, where we're not trying to perpetuate this classic culture. We're actually trying to like challenge it. And so the school became a manifesto for Walter Gropius to use as a method to challenge the government and authority. Yes, it provided exceptional opportunities for students, but it did have a cost because it wasn't without things that put students in awkward positions. Um, so it had an unprecedented pedagogy, and when I mean pedagogy, it's a educational philosophy to how something should be taught. And so Gropius created this circle, and this circle represents the whole idea of your studies there. So instead of a program guide, you would get this and you would start on the outside. So you would have 1 year and all you do is the preliminary course. Everybody's in it together and it challenges you and it makes you go through and study all the different types of art and design. So you would learn everything. You'd learn how to weave if you were a classic painter. You'd learn how to draw if you were a printmaker. You'd all of the things. So kind of a cool idea is like, hey, like design elements and principles apply to everything. So that's really great. We can look at school today and say like, yeah, you're taking art history classes, you have studio electives. Um, Kind of similar and they complement, sure. Um, Bauhaus considered this preliminary course to be the fundamentals of artistic endeavor. He had a team of colleagues that were at the time famous designers, and still now, I suppose, but they came in as their experts and they loved coming in and um, creating controversy because there were what they call as old masters that were the teachers before. They still existed. Gropius just like took control of the school, but the school still like functioned and existed. So he's like coming into this like big system and like bringing in new classes and his own faculty and new things, and there's a lot of conflict. So he brought in new people, shook some things up. Courses explored color and form, principles of composition, studies of materiality, life drawing, visual analysis. All of these don't sound super controversial, but for example, the life drawing class was a life drawing of movement. And so it wasn't uncommon for students to go into a room and have like 10 naked models running throughout the room and doing different exercises and activities. And the students would have to draw them live with the idea that you're actually capturing movement. You're capturing movement through, in essence, form. Um, so naked bodies were very controversial. And the idea that they would just be running loosely like around you was a new thing, but students loved it. It really like got people motivated in like doing cool things. And sometimes it takes these like big gestures to like break through some preconceived notions. And he was working also with having students unlearn things because if you were a senior when Gropius started, you were no longer a senior. You had to go back to the preliminary course and start all over, which also caused some drama. Um, but then once you got through the preliminary course, then you would start breaking out into more of your disciplinary focuses. So today, um, I'll first talk about the like ancient Egypt. The per ankh is now like the per ankh. Rarely do we still see ancient Egypt used in like contemporary examples, but it is now like per ankh. We'll talk about this, and then I think in our next class, I'm gonna really focus on what does that mean for us now here, and how does it translate to the Midwest Bauhaus? Like this was in Germany. This was this like crazy liberal design school in Germany. What does it have to do with us here? Um, and it definitely deals with World War II. So today, these are all screenshots from different websites, social medias. They're all over. Actually, the largest headquarters of like the House of Life is in Detroit. You can see this is a flyer from one of their events. They have a movie night. Um, and so they're really interesting. Um, there's a lot of things that happen. And we have this letter here. This is from Detroit. This is a letter to their group where you can see spiritual, they're devoted to spiritual awakening, healing, and decriminalizing oh, right, certain substances. So this is This is how it's translated today. Our mission is to create sacred spaces, offer education, and advocate for the right to explore plant medicines for healing and transformation. Um, and so it's still throughout all of this time, and it's called per ankh and uses the same symbol. It does have a translation. Um, there are Airbnbs that are modeled after this idea that you can go stay at and have a spiritual experience, like rooted in like ancient Egyptian beliefs. Um, there's conversations here. This one, are you an investor we are looking for? There's a lot out there. I was just going through and finding here's one of their events. This takes place at the Detroit Church, a safe, intimate space for conversations about psychedelics and family. Um, and it's Planned Parenthood, by the way, just to clarify that. So it's an interesting correlation in how we um, go about this today. There's a larger school. This is, I think, a screenshot from their website, the House of Life, the Mystery School of Divine Partnerships. This one's based in geometry and goes more like cosmos. Um, but you can see how the original beliefs, whether I'm kind of curious if you think then the perpetuation of the values and beliefs of ancient Egypt were, how did that, not only do we have the artifacts and the scriptures and we have the writings to understand, but this is still happening today. Um, do you think that this is, there's no right or wrong answer, but do you think that this is a perpetuation of the belief system? Or like it's just evolved in new ways to meet contemporary society? Or is this maybe a token or a bastardization or people kind of tapping into things that they might not fully understand, but hey, the body, the place, and the cosmos, like that has meaning. I'm just kind of curious what your initial thoughts are. I know we're not going to dive too deep into any of the belief systems of these, but you can clearly tell that there's been a deviation from the original belief system, which may or may not be assumed would happen after so many years, and cross cultures. This is, I don't know where this particular one takes place, but it's not Egypt, and it's not Northern Africa, or yeah, so kind of curious. What are your thoughts here? It's something that happens. I mean, we're looking at it as an extreme example of religion or a belief system, but it does happen in design when we are inspired by something historical, um, and without, oh my gosh, my screen, without um, really looking into the root of it, it's really easy to like take a motif or a symbol or maybe a term, or an initial preconception of something and like translate it into your own world today. It's not a life or death scenario, but it is something that as designers, we all need to really think about our role in that and what that means for our own design work, how we're using precedent, how we're, what our own methods of research are, and the role of design lineage is, and maybe even our own place in the grand scheme of things. Maybe we operate in a system not unlike the House of Life, but it's just maybe really is like a bastardization of the House of Life without intention. Um, it's very possible that the creation of this symbol here, the black circle with the yellow plus sign, um, was created without proper understanding of the historical and iconic um, typology, um, and what that actually means, and the weakness in society to align ourselves with symbols that we don't always understand. Um, and maybe that doesn't even matter, but it is something very unique that's happening today, um, that is worth mentioning. And in fact, I even pulled up a photo here because when we think about ancient Egypt, and I'll tell you more about the Bauhaus, but I will tell you that um, Veganism was enforced, so was um, starving oneself as an act of purity, bloodletting to let out toxins so that you could be creative. There were a cupping, you would have to cup, or like, not even in the way we see it today, but like dangerous. There were a lot of practices that the faculty told the students that they must do to be in alignment with these new ideas. And the students, most of them did it because they wanted to be a part of that thing, without realizing the slippery slope of psychological manipulation that could be happening to them. So this is um, a sign that's there's some of them around, um, and I don't know if anybody has seen it, but it's written in with contractual language. So it says, as a ready student, faculty, or staff member, and then it goes on and it has different statements of I will. Um, and so if you didn't contribute to this, um, or say I will, if you don't sign into this, um, what does that mean for you? At the top, it says it fosters collaboration, but if you didn't contribute to this, um, then you might want to think about what that means and what this symbol actually means if somebody tries to give you something, so that you become one of many. Um, don't lose your identity and just be aware that even with the purest of reasons, this is made to support inclusivity and, of course, civility. But if you weren't asked what civility means to you or inclusivity means to you or what you need, as a student that reinforces those things, then I would think about where these statements are coming from, um, and kind of the reason why that it's phrased like this, um, in as a contractual document that you would normally be expected to sign. Um, just naturally aligned with the Weimar Republic and the House of Life topic. So I did put it in there. This lecture exists without all of the RITI stuff, but this is something new that's been going on. And it just is start of happening. Just keep it in mind. Um, anyway, questions about anything we discussed today? Because then I'm going to open it up to talking about costumes where you do get to express yourself. And if you don't have one, we can talk about that too. The shops. And I will stop.